person. So today we're talking about how to get stuff out of your head and into the world. What is productivity and creativity in your life, and how you can apply what you know and make it materialize into things that matter. So last week there had been a lot of questions about writing in particular, and so I thought this week we could talk a little bit about how all 11 executive functioning skills affect our ability to write, but they also affect our ability to take our ideas, our passions, and create them into something we feel proud of. I'm going to ask you to hold on 1 second because I have my heater on and I'm a little hot. Hold on. There you go. Thank you so much. So, hi, Dina from Pennsylvania. So when we are going to write something down, like if we have an idea, if we have an intuition, if we have something that sparks our interest, we have to use all of our executive functioning skills to take it from that magic, that little like thread in the sky, and into actually something that is 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 more developed, I guess is the word I want to say. Hi, Michelle, nice to see you, and Tanya. So we want to translate how to get things done, not just think about them. So when we let's review what the executive functioning skills are, right? So we have the hot skills, which are skills we're conscious of. And those are things like impulse control, emotional control, planning, prioritizing, organizing, time management. And we have the cooler skills, which are the skills that are more unconscious. Things like goal-directed persistence, shift flexibility, working memory, sustained attention, and of course, metacognitive awareness. So self-evaluation, how we understand ourselves. So what I'd like to start today with is a question for you. What gets in the way for you when you have an idea, when you have something that you know you need to get done, and you can't take it from that idea stage and make it into the reality that you want it to? I'd really like to hear from you about some of these challenges. In the meantime, I'm going to do a little teaching on urgent and important. I think that the urgent and important matrix is is critical to understand for everyone, but particularly for people with ADHD, because we confuse what's urgent and what's important. So, what is urgent and important? And the reason that I'm talking about this is because the value of urgency and importance underlies how we access our skills and what we decide is the thing we want to focus on. So urgent tasks cause us to react immediately and stop whatever else we're doing and attend to these tasks. There's a time pressure associated with them. Important tasks guide us toward our purpose and goals and reflect our life values. They rely on planning, organization, and initiation. Now, what I want to do, and I can't figure out how to share my screen, so I'm just going to have to visually explain this to you, and hopefully Annie might be able to have something she can pull up. So we're going to look at a matrix of two axes. On this axis is what's important. On this axis is what's urgent. So we have different quadrants, and there are 4 quadrants. So we have urgent and important not important and urgent, and not important and not urgent. So Annie just pulled up the Eisenhower matrix. If you want to click that, you'll have a visual to look at what I'm talking about. Again, I want to ask you to please let me know what gets in the way of you taking something from the idea stage to the action stage. I'm going to come to your comments when I finish this explanation. So this Eisenhower matrix is divided into 4 quadrants, and the first quadrant are tasks that are both urgent and important. I call this the do it now box, okay? And these are crises. When we spend a lot of time in this box, we become stressed and burned out. So we want to minimize our time spent here by creating schedules and being as organized as possible. The second box is when things are important but they're not urgent. And this has to do with goals and planning. This is the desired quadrant of flow. These actions help us work toward goals or projects and keep balance in our lives. Like, things like whether it's a yearly physical or getting a haircut, or, you sit down to work on a project for work. It's in the morning, you're fresh, you have your coffee, you start off with something easy to do that gets you into it, maybe writing a small description, and you find that you're in the flow. Time in this quadrant is like riding a bike. You stay on top of your important things, you're making progress, you feel calm because you're dealing with the issues before they arise in crisis mode. The third box is things that are not important but are urgent. And these are your interruptions. These are activities that interrupt and steer us away from our important tasks in the second quadrant, okay, the second box. When we're in quadrant 3, we feel like we aren't getting anywhere. We're stuck, we're frustrated, we're stressed out. There's all kinds of interruptions that are coming our way, so we can't actually stick with the thing that feels good to do. Productive procrastination is in this quadrant. So in this quadrant are things that we do instead of the things we really have to do because we're interrupted, someone wants something right away, and we pay attention to those. So we want to minimize the time that we spend here by having a list of our tasks and focusing on the important ones first. We also need to learn how to say no to other people's interruptions. And this is a big challenge, and I'd like to focus on this today. And we're talking about productivity and creativity, because the way that we can stick with our productivity or our creative juices is to be able to say no to interruptions and to differentiate what is important to pay attention to and what is noise. The last quadrant is things that are not important and things that are not urgent. And this is the quadrant of distractions. These are activities that distract us from the tasks at hand. Anything that we do to waste time and avoid necessary work. This quadrant 4, is about procrastination, avoidance procrastination in particular, tardiness, incomplete work, negative self-talk, and stress. We want to increase our awareness of distractions and set limits with these activities. So I'll just review one more time. There are 4 quadrants. Quadrant 1, which is both urgent and important. I call this the do it now quadrant. Quadrant 2, which is not urgent and important. That's the goals, the planning, healthy living choices, the flow quadrant. Quadrant 3, which is urgent but not important. Those are the interruptions. And quadrant 4, it's not important and it's not urgent, it's a distraction. So with that in mind, let's get to some of your comments about what are the obstacles that get in the way when you want to be productive, when you have creative ideas or projects you want to engage in and you cannot get to them. So now we can look at which of the executive functioning skills um, sort of works with or against that urgent and important matrix. Let's see. So Lynn says, getting things done, not just thinking about it. So that's an obstacle. How do I translate something I'm thinking about into getting it done? And I need it to be visual. Hi, Tracy. Hi, Julie. Also trying to verbalize it. So maybe perhaps you're a visual thinker. So let's take a minute and think, and I want to ask you a question. Do you think you're more of a visual thinker, or do you like to have things in words and written down? That makes a difference for you. Or do you like to get information through your auditory channel? Let me know in the chat box, visual, verbal, or auditory. That's important because when we can identify the channel where you most like to get information, we can see if it's related to how you most like to produce information or projects. Justine says one of the problems is having so much to do. So yes, when we are overcommitted, when we are overwhelmed, it's hard to see what's urgent and what's important. Everything seems urgent and important, and then you're living in quadrant one. You are stressed. Harlan, super wonderful wordsmithing at 4 a.m. when I wake up with hot ideas. God bless you. By 9:30 after breakfast, nothing comes to mind. So that's really interesting. And what you're telling us, Harlan, is that when you wake up, you are fresh. You are cooking. Your brain is really churning out ideas and um, and you that's the best time for you to perhaps keep a journal or record with your on your phone or make a list or have piles of paper of things. But if that's when you're productive, how can you lean into that time? Although 4 a.m. is a very early start to the day. So maybe to make sure that you can sort of do a brain dump at that time of the day so that later you don't have to generate the ideas, but you can come back to what was already generated. Natalie, I get excited about a new project, but then get overwhelmed with thinking about creating it, which creates barriers. I want to talk about that, Natalie, because I think that is a fantastic statement. So when there's something new, it 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 taps the novelty in areas in our brain, and those paths of novelty are mediated by dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter. And as we know, ADHD brains make less dopamine. So it's harder to work up excitement for a mundane task. So what happens is the transition between when something's new and exciting and the actual work that's attached with manifesting that means that we're transitioning from that initial excitement into something that may feel or seem less rewarding right away. One of the things that happens in that overwhelm is that you have these ideas, but you can't get them from the idea stage, right, into the action stage because there are so many of them. So in that case, the best thing to do is to dump out the ideas and then pick one and break it down. Breaking it down is very important. One of the, actually, I'm so sorry because when I talked about the hot EF skills and the cool ones, I forgot to mention initiation, which is a conscious skill. It's a hot skill. So I apologize for that. One of the things that gets in the way of initiating is that feeling overwhelmed. Everything seems to have the same value of interest or importance. I've worked with many adults and students who can't write a paper, or they write a paper that's 10 pages when all that's needed is 3, because they can't figure out how to limit themselves on the ideas that they have, or they have a lot of ideas, but they can't figure out which one is the one to go through. So I think it's important when you have a new project to take your project and break it down. And one of the best ways to break it down, in my opinion, might be with Post-its. There's something really valuable about putting your ideas up and out in a visual way that you can see them and then you can move them around. So this helps with a number of executive functioning skills simultaneously. It helps with organization. It helps with planning. It helps with a sense of value. What is important here? How does this thing connect to that? It's very hard for a lot of people with ADHD to write a paper where you can't move stuff around. And sometimes working on a screen doesn't allow you enough flexibility with that. So I want you to think a little bit out of a box. Maybe a chalkboard would help, but something where you can write things down. I remember when I was in college, one of my friends and I were taking a class together. It was a semiotics class, so I may be dating myself. And we had to write a paper every week, one typed page of text. It could be single space, there could be no margins, it was one page. That was very challenging. And he and I approached it very differently. I would have my idea and I would outline my idea, like I want to say this, then I want to say that, then I want to say this. And he would buy a big piece of poster board and he would have his idea and then he would draw an arrow. And then he would have another idea, and then he would draw another arrow. And both of us did very well in that class, but we did it in very different ways. So that's something that I want you to think about when you're writing. Would it help for you to have a board of some kind? Now, we call those graphic organizers, and there are lots of them online, but you might want to just create one or think about one that works for your particular brain. Hi, Stacy. Um, Okay, what if you get overwhelmed by the list you create? Nakia, that's a really good point. And I want to tell you that I have a list right now with 20 things on it. It's overwhelming. So what I do is I see that list of 20 things and then I break it down. Okay, Monday, what are the things that I can do on that day? And I maybe put 2 or 3 things on that day. Tuesday, what can I do on that day? It's fine to have a master list, but for a lot of people with ADHD, that master list becomes overwhelming and depressing and unmanageable. So you have a master list where you can just keep track of stuff, but then you have to have a daily workable list. Otherwise, you're never going to get through that master list and feel like you don't make any progress because you just keep adding to it, right? So you want to take that master list, make it, and then break it down over the course of the week into smaller doable lists. Stuck and avoid. Okay, so hi Vanita, hi Tracy, hi Emmanuel. So what happens is you spend a lot of time in quadrant 4 because you get distracted. You also can spend some time in quadrant 3 where you're interrupted and then you don't feel like you're getting anywhere because there are these interruptions and you can never actually follow through. It's kind of like if you're trying to cook dinner and somebody's interrupting you at every step along the way. You'll never get past laying out the ingredients or cutting them up because you can't cook them because you need to follow a sequence in order to follow the recipe. You can't follow a recipe if people are interrupting you all the time. And it's the same thing with other kinds of projects. So I would encourage you, and I'm practicing this myself this year because if you were here last week, I talked about time management and this idea of time confetti. And I'm probably going to come back to this a lot because I find it so compelling as a concept and as something that I do, which is we know that media multitasking doesn't exist in the brain. It saps our energy and it stresses us out. So if we know that, why do we do that? Why do we say we're going to cook dinner and we answer the phone and we help our kids with the homework and we text our friend at the same time? That's not going to be a very satisfying experience. Perhaps when you're cooking dinner, the only interruption needs to be helping your kids with the homework. So how do you set limits on interruptions and distractions? What I would do if I were you is I would set a period of time that's interruption, distraction free, and then a period of time where you can check your email, where you can check your texts, or you let people know, I'm in a 45-minute personal retreat to get some work done. I'll be free at this time if you want to ask me a question. Otherwise, please don't interrupt me. It's reasonable to say to someone, I can't be interrupted right now. Of course, there are emergencies, your child's school calls, they have a fever. Of course, I don't know why I'm saying that because not many kids go to school anymore, but you know what I mean. In which case in the pre-COVID days, you'd have to leave your office, get your kid, go home, etc. But what I'm saying is that's a particular kind of interruption, and maybe what you want to do is link the number of people for whom you will accept an interruption, like a health interruption or something, and have them have a particular ringtone so you know who it is who's contacting you instead of being open to interruptions at large. Turn off notifications on your computer, sounds on your computer. Really imagine yourself in a retreat period so that you can submerge yourself in your work or your project. Otherwise, you are going to feel like you're stuck in this cycle. Let's see. Emmanuel says something about being overwhelmed with self-doubt. So I think that's very important to address. And I would love it if you could say some more about that, Emmanuel, because when we doubt ourselves, of course, we're not able to actually lean into something that we're interested in or committed to because we're not sure we can accomplish what we're doing. We don't believe in our skills. And so we have to counteract those negative self-statements with something positive based on previous times when we were able to succeed. And honestly, I will tell you that at the bottom of my computer, I have 6 Post-its, each of them with a little affirmation. One says, quit taking it personally. One says, I'm only one person. I can only do so much. Um, Whatever it is that you need to remember. And I think that helps. Occasionally I look at them, sometimes I don't, but they're there if I need it. Charlie. But often interruptions are so subtle. Yes, even someone helping me with the task I'm doing can interrupt my thoughts enough to throw my thinking. Well, that's really interesting, Charlie. So if someone is helping you with the task you're doing and you are thinking, well, what you're telling me is you're actually multitasking. So you're getting help with the task at hand, but in your brain, you're also doing something else. So in those times, it's really important to have a piece of paper or a pad to write like cue words for your ideas so you can come back to them when the work that you're doing with that person is over. Um, Natalie, you're a visual person. Tammy, verbal, written. Tracy, visual. Kelly, visual. Lynn, not by auditory. So I like for someone to show, visual. Okay, so this is really interesting because many people with ADHD actually are visual learners. Now, I myself am a visual learner. I like to see things as I like to be taught them as well. But if you explain something to me, but you're not showing me, that's a little harder for me to understand. And so I think if you're a visual learner, let's lean into what we know about ourselves so that we actually create our projects and move forward with our productivity in a visual way. Um, let's see, Nakaya? I get excited about my ideas, but then the excitement fizzles and the idea no longer seems interesting. So it's great to have a lot of ideas, and I encourage you to write some of them down. But sometimes what happens is we become an idea generator, and we're not able to actually execute any of those ideas. So I think the goal would be to have, write down your ideas and see which ones actually are still compelling a day or two later or compelling enough because your excitement from that moment, that ADHD, oh my God, I'm so excited, I want to do it right away, is going to dwindle naturally. But that doesn't mean you're not interested altogether. It just might mean you've gone from a 100 level interest to perhaps a 75. And a 75 in one area is better than a 40 on another task. This is a great quote, thank you. ADHD individuals also get in the zone when they are challenged or thrown into a competitive environment. Sometimes a new or novel task attracts their attention. Novelty is short-lived, and everything gets old after a while. Most people with an ADHD nervous system can engage tasks and access their abilities when the task is urgent, a do or die deadline, for example. This is why procrastination is an almost universal impairment in people with ADHD. Thank you for sharing that. Overwhelmed. I need hands-on. You can relate to this, Nakia. Thank you. Visual. Yes, the master list is overwhelming. So let's talk a little bit about that master list some more. Because if we're talking about productivity and creativity and how to get something out of your head and into the world, the master list is basically your data dump. But that list has to then be amended, be shortened, be translated into some kind of system. So what I would encourage you to do is think for a minute. Does the list should be content related? If you have a list of errands, I don't know about you, I have some errands I want to do on a Saturday. I might group them, I generally group them in my head by location, right? The post office and the grocery store are over here, so I'm going to do those together. If I want to get my nails done, that's over here. That's a separate place. I'm not going to go to the grocery store, get my nails done, and then go to the post office. for a number of reasons, not to mention things spoiling. So what we want to do is group together similar types of activities, similar types of ideas, similar types of projects, so that then you can work on a role in one area and then you can move to something else. That works for some people. Now, sometimes some people with ADHD don't like to do that. They get bored. They want to do something from one area and then something from another. That's fine too. The idea is how you map it out, because that's really what I'm talking about here, creating a map for yourself. When you create a map, you address your 11 executive functioning skills because you're setting up some sort of structure so that everything doesn't have to stay in your head. When everything stays in your head, when you're trying to figure it all out in your head, is when you become overwhelmed, exhausted, and you give up. Good to hear that, Maddie. Lynn, does anyone talk to the self so they don't forget what they're doing? That's actually a very common thing for people with ADHD. You sort of talk yourself through things. It's also common as we age. A lot of people will talk themselves through things. But for a lot of kids and adults with ADHD, talking to themselves helps with the verbal memory and to encode things. Maddie, you underestimate how long things take. I hear you. Many people with ADHD overestimate their ability to get something done in a certain period of time, and they underestimate how long something's going to take. So one of the things that we can do to practice correctly estimating how long something takes is to do an experiment for ourselves. When we do an activity, make a note on our phone or that whatever that daily list is of how long it took you to do it. And then come back to that at the end of the week so that when you look into your next week, you can see, actually, you know what, it took me an hour to grocery shop, even though I thought it would only be 30 minutes. Nakia, I try to use the sticky notes to create smaller, more manageable pieces, but then get annoyed with seeing the stickies. LOL. Feels like a constant can't win or losing situation. Okay. So Nakia, what I want to do is you might have too many stickies and you might have some unrealistic expectations about what you want to accomplish. Excuse me. What would it be like to set a slightly lower set of goals for yourself for the day? And I'm not saying, go from 10 to 0, but, maybe go from 10 to 4. Because right now it seems to me that you want to feel a sense of accomplishment, a sense of progress, a feeling of, whoa, I'm in the flow, I'm getting stuff done. And you can't do that if you're annoyed at all your sticky notes and you have 7,000 of them. So let's try to streamline. And again, if what I would do is I would look at your list and say, what's urgent? What do I have to do now or else? What's important for me to do, but it's not urgent. It's like it's part of my daily maintenance. So it's not urgent that I go for a run today, but it's important because it makes me feel good. So that has to go on the list, right? What's not urgent and not important might be surfing the web to see, if I can get this sweater I like at a better price. That's maybe for later in the day when you've accomplished one or two things. Alethea, yes, it's very hard for kids with ADHD. And that's why they need graphic organizers. That's why they need our help as adults to try to limit what the goal is so that they feel less overwhelmed. Time blindness, again, is an interesting component of ADHD, and that's about not feeling what time is. We talked about that last time. Okay, Emmanuel says, space out during explaining. Yeah. So Lynn, when someone's explaining something to you, take some notes or take some pictures. I recently got a sewing machine and I broke my leg, so I never used it. And then I decided last Saturday was the time. I'm going back to the store and I'm going to have him teach me some things about the machine. And as I was driving, I was telling my friend this, and she said, make sure you take pictures or videotape it. And I was like, oh, so smart. So I did. And so today or tomorrow, when I go to sit down to use it, I'm not going to freak out because I'll have that cue right there. That's how we can use technology to serve us. Emmanuel, when I'm working on a work assignment, if I'm feeling stuck or embarrassed, the amount of time a task has taken me, or being nervous of the product that I created. Right. So one of the things, Emmanuel, is if you're embarrassed, is someone actually humiliating you? Is someone, criticizing you or yelling at you for the time it takes? Because that is something completely separate than what you're doing to yourself. If you are, if you're working, something takes as long as it takes. The challenge and that time, the way that time blindness figures into this is that you're not estimating correctly how much time it is going to take. You're not giving yourself enough space to do the project. And so that's what's worth thinking about. When you're faced with a task, take a minute and reflect, how long did the last task take me? And if you can't remember, open up an Excel spreadsheet if you use Google or something like it, and start to keep notes. This project started here, finished here, so that you can start to record and see how long things actually take. There's no judgment about it. It's just how your brain works. And what we want to do is use as much information as we can about how you work to set you up for a program of success. Of course, being nervous about the product that you've created is pretty natural. And if you've experienced failure or criticism in the past, you're going to be more insecure about what you're providing. And so if you are getting positive feedback, I would encourage you to try to take a picture of that positive feedback, or after the meeting or in the meeting, write down a few keywords that they said about what was good about what you did, so that you can keep that somewhere and refer to it when you're feeling insecure. Oh, remember when I was working on this? This was actually the feedback I got. I can do this next thing. Tracy says, great ideas, no follow through. So one of the things that I think happens is that you might have ideas that are just too big to actually do. Like, I'm going to create a brand new product for kids with ADHD that's going to solve their time management problems. That's a big task. It's a big ask. You might want to start smaller, like, I'm going to work on helping my son or daughter with their time management by either using something that exists, or learning more about time management, or teaching them about time. So basically, excuse me, excuse me, basically, drawing a smaller circle of what you're going to work in. Nakia, you're a visual and kinesthetic learner. And that's true for many, many people with ADHD. Harlan, fatigue is what I think a part of my previous comment. Once I'm envisioned it at 4 a.m., going back to write it later seems to feel like not this thing again, boring and uninteresting. Right, so one of the things that we want to think about is that what may strike us at one time as super compelling may seem less interesting later. That doesn't mean that it's not interesting. It may not have the same fire under it. Keep the idea, circle back to it, let it percolate. Don't necessarily dismiss it right away. Paula, do you include daily routine tasks in your to-do list? E.g., brush your teeth, make your bed. I find I forget, but I'm also overwhelmed with big lists. I think that a daily routine task list can be very helpful, particularly for people who get overwhelmed and can't remember things. And so there's nothing wrong with having a simple daily routine. Brush teeth, make bed, eat breakfast, feed the cat, go to work. Those kinds of things help organize you, and they're super helpful for organizing kids. And when we have that kind of routine, it also helps us with other executive functioning skills, such as planning and prioritizing, such as shifting from one thing to another, such as emotional control. Instead of doing, not wanting to do it so you don't, you see that it's there so you do. Also, it helps with focus, which is another um, unconscious and cool executive functioning skill that hilariously I forgot to mention. Okay, thank you for that article on productivity killers. Nakia, thank you. I appreciate that. Duly noted for the future. Lynn, you said you think you're nervous when you're explaining things. Of course, a lot of people can get nervous, particularly people with ADHD. They're embarrassed that they have to explain. They're embarrassed that they need more time. Nakia, thanks for the feedback on the stickies. A lot of time I use them so I won't forget, not always for tasks. Charlie, I know how to put activities in place, but where I struggle is when I'm rushing about stressed doing stuff. If we could all slow down and plan that a lot, then it's okay. I could do shopping, but whilst I'm walking around the aisle, if I get distracted, I can have memory blanks and feel overwhelmed if the kids are distracting me, or someone interrupts me. Right. So one of the things that would help if you know that you get distracted that way is having those visual cues. I'm going to tell you, I do not go to the grocery store without a list. That doesn't mean I don't impulsively say, wow, those raspberries look great, I'm going to buy those. But, and they weren't on my list, but they look good, so I want them. But it'll help me make sure that I get the spinach that I want, or the milk, and rather than get all the way home and be like, oh my God, I forgot the milk. So in those cases, we want to have something to sort of cue us, to move us along. And that's another advantage in terms of our working memory. We don't have to hold it in our head. We can have a cue. The rushing around is really important to notice, to acknowledge, because the more we rush, the more adrenaline is running in our system, the harder it is for us to actually access our memory, to stay centered, and to stay in a flow. Instead, we move into quadrant 1, where we're stressed, where there's an urgency, and we get frantic. And when we're frantic or frothy, we're not thinking clearly. And that's when we actively need to slow things down. And if you're in the grocery store and your kids are distracting you, or someone's interrupting you, what would it be like for you to say, whoa, this is too much. I need everybody to count to 5. We got to regroup here. That's a reasonable thing to do. And it's also helpful. Yeah, my kids even tell me when to take my coat off when we've come in and I've left it on for hours. That is so sweet. Michelle, I talk to myself and ask the time when going into another room to remember why I went. That happens to a lot of us. So, that happens. We have a lot on our mind, particularly right now. We're all under a lot of stress, living in a terrible pandemic. So we can, we're thinking about one thing and we go into a room and we're like, what did I come in here for? Okay, so talk to yourself. That's good. Another thing, sometimes it works for people to assign different tasks to their different fingers. I want to go to the dry cleaner. I want to pick up some milk. I want to go to I want to mail that package. So it's cleaner, milk, package. And you can turn to your hand that way. Paula, so would you have a different list for a different block of the day? I might, yeah. I mean, if I have a work block, I might have a list for what I want to do in that work block. If I have an errand list, I might want to have a list for that, of course. Maddie, I know breaking things down into small steps works, but I have an ideal of blitzing something until it's done. I don't like to start. I stop and start. Starting things is quite an issue. Maybe that's why I don't want to stop and start. It can take me up to an hour to get in the focus zone in order to be able to do a task like writing. So I need time around the task, which I don't always have. Arg. Hmm. Well, what I want to say to that, Maddie, is that when people have trouble starting, it's often because the tasks seem too big or overwhelming. And so I understand that when it's so hard to start something, you don't want to stop, and that it takes you a while to get into the focus, and particularly to do a task like writing. So what I might want to do is have some pre-writing, writing, and then some post-writing. So things that kind of get you into the task, like maybe your supplies or checking your outline or writing, getting your research. So you have some things that are preparing you for being in the zone. Then you're in the zone. And then when you're finished, then you can come back for editing and things like that rather than editing as you write. And that's something that I'm so glad I'm remembering to say. When you are writing, editing along the way slows you down. And a lot of people with ADHD do this, and some people without, of course, do it too. Either way, it slows you down. You just want to write. Then you can go back and edit. It's always easier to edit whatever's been created than to keep editing it as you're going along. And I think that has to do with some sense of insecurity. For a lot of people with ADHD, they're not sure that what they wrote or created is good, and or um, it has to do with struggling to get the idea out in the way that you want it to be on the paper. And so in what I would strongly urge you to do is just get your ideas out. Then you can come back and edit it with a fresh um, brain. So write, pause or take a break, and then come back to it. You'll have a fresher perspective. Thank you, Nakia. Um, Paula, are there any good list apps that are less overwhelming with a master list? I can have up to 30 things that are just daily tasks. You know, there's this app called To Do, I think it is, and it has a lot of good ways to break down things instead of a master list. Like you can move things to a certain day. You get the experience of drawing a line through it. So I check that out. Charlie, something that I think isn't always recognized is ADHD, ADD, and women's hormones. Amen. My ADHD is so much worse when hormonal, so I will definitely use this plan, especially for that time. Yes, and the other thing is about ADHD and menopause or perimenopause. So, because women who don't have ADHD feel like they do when they go through perimenopause, and that has to do with how the hormones affect the working memory and the memory system in general. So I think creating that some kind of a plan now, whatever age you are, can carry you forward. Lynn, yes, dump and edit. Um, Nakia, I do the finger task thing all the time. Way to go! All right. And finally, my last question, Paula, do you group tasks so that your list isn't 100 things a day? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And I struggle with that, to be perfectly honest. So I group, I have my tasks, and I actually divide them. I'm like, email, that's one task. Administrative tasks, like banking, that's another task. Respond, like projects that are responding to emails, that's a task. Writing, like I have all of these things, and I try to separate them into different sections, because otherwise, and even different pieces of paper, otherwise I feel like I'm never getting anywhere. And that is the biggest hurdle to using our creativity, is we feel like there's just more, always, 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 and we don't get a sense of satisfaction. And over time, that's very disheartening. It's debilitating. So what we want to do is maybe have a master list, but then break that down. Like this week, these are the things that I'm going to work on. That's it. The other stuff is not so important. And that's why it's great to create some urgent and important matrix of your own. So we're going to wind up where we started, okay? What are urgent and important things for you? What are interruptions? What are distractions? How do you know when you're in the flow? What do you like about that? And what kinds of activities nurture that flow? Thank you so much for joining. Dana has one comment, so I really want to say it. If I find my home is organized, if it's easier to get things together and out the door, I'm always late, but working on it, and I use simple lists. You make the list out on Sunday for the week. That's great advice. Thank you, Dana. And the finger task thing, Tammy, is you assign a task to every finger. I'm going to the chiropractor. I'm going to the dry cleaner. I'm picking up the milk. I'm going to the dump. So these are the things I need to do today, and they're associated. Acupuncture, dry cleaner, milk, and the dump. And so you can keep referring back to your fingers as a touchstone. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Dr. Sharon Saline on behalf of AttitudeMag.com. This is our weekly Facebook Live. I want to encourage you to please go to my website, www.drsharonsaline.com, and check out the Instagram Live that's coming for older teens and young adults who are neurodiverse, on living successfully with ADHD during the pandemic. And check out my upcoming class, Stop White Knuckling It, Parenting Neurodiverse Kids during the COVID era. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.